You know, sometimes I still walk past the front of my house, catch a glimpse of that gleam of reinforced steel, and I have to pinch myself. I probably broke the world record for the most over-engineered response to a nosy neighbor in human history. But let me tell you, it was worth every single penny. Every strained muscle and every bewildered look from the delivery guys. How did I get here, you ask? How did I, a reasonably quiet, admittedly private individual, end up installing what amounts to a bank vault door on my suburban home? Well, settle in, because this story is a doozy, and it all started because my homeowners association president, a woman whose personality was as overbearing as her perfume, decided she had the right to know what color my damn duvet cover was. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because you are not going to believe the audacity that led to this. It all began innocently enough, or so it seemed. When I moved into the esteemed Willow Creek Estates, I bought the house for its quiet cul-de-sac, the mature trees, and the fact that it backed onto a small nature preserve. What I hadn't properly accounted for was Brenda McTavish, HOA president extraordinaire, queen of her own self-styled fief, and the woman who apparently believed her jurisdiction extended into my very soul, or at least into my living room. Brenda was, to put it mildly, a character. Picture this: early 50s, always impeccably, if somewhat ostentatiously dressed, in clothes that screamed, "Look at my disposable income," but whispered, "I have questionable taste." Her hair was a rigidly coiffed helmet, impervious to wind or reason, and she drove a gleaming white SUV so enormous it probably had its own zip code, which she navigated through our narrow residential streets with the entitled aggression of a tank commander. My first run-in was over the shade of begonias I'd planted in my front flower bed. Apparently Crimson Delight was not on the approved list of Scarlet Blaze or Ruby Radiance. I received a very official-looking letter complete with a poorly photocopied swatch card, informing me of my grievous horticultural transgression. I'm an engineer by trade, problem solver, a man who deals in logic and specifications. I read the HOA bylaws, all 300 painstaking pages of them, and found the relevant and surprisingly vague clause about harmonious planting schemes. I replied with a polite reference letter pointing out the ambiguity and the subjective nature of harmonious, and included a data sheet for Crimson Delight highlighting its pest resistance. A community benefit, surely. That, I think, was my first mistake. Brenda didn't like logic. She liked compliance. She especially didn't like it when you showed you'd actually read the rules. Rules she clearly hadn't quite mastered herself beyond her own interpretation of them. She expected you to quiver, apologize, and rip out the offending flora. My calm, factual response seemed to short-circuit something in her brain. She didn't reply directly to my letter. Instead, the fine started. $5 a day for non-compliant begonias. I paid the first one, then sent another letter stating I was paying under protest and reiterated my position. The second fine arrived, this time $10 a day. It was then I realized I wasn't dealing with a rational administrator, but a petty tyrant. My neighbors, mostly older folks who'd lived here for years, just sighed. Told me it was easier to go along with Brenda. She gets like this. Old Mr. Henderson from across the street told me one afternoon, peering over his meticulously trimmed azaleas. "Wears you down, she does. Best just to plant the red one, son." But something in me, that engineering stubbornness perhaps, just couldn't. It wasn't about the begonias anymore. It was about the principle. It was about a grown woman in a position of minor hyperlocal authority, who was acting like a medieval monarch. The next salvo was my mailbox. It was the original one. Perfectly functional. Standard black. But apparently it lacked a certain je ne sais quoi that Brenda's newly amended regulations, passed with her board of sycophants rubber stamping it, I later learned, now mandated. This time it was a brass flag, not the existing silver one. Another letter. Another fine. This one starting at $20. I looked into replacing the flag. It was a $30 part. But again it was the gall. The sheer arbitrary nature of it. This went on for months. A slow, escalating war of passive aggression and official-looking stationery. I'd research. I'd write meticulously polite and legally grounded rebuttals, sometimes citing specific HOA codes back at her. Codes she'd clearly overlooked or misinterpreted. or even clauses that directly contradicted her new amendments. She'd just invent new rules or increase the fines. Her letters getting progressively more unhinged, filled with capitalized words and exclamation points. She even tried to fine me for the type of bird feeder I had, claiming it attracted undesirable avian elements. I kid you not. I had a small simple feeder for chickadees and nuthatches. What did she want? Eagles only. The tipping point, the incident that launched 1,000 tons of steel, metaphorically speaking, though eventually literally, was her grand assertion about interior aesthetic cohesion. It began subtly. Brenda started making comments during her neighborhood patrols, which consisted of her slowly cruising in her oversized SUV, window down, sunglasses perched on her nose, scanning properties like a U-boat captain looking for enemy shipping. She'd make pointed remarks to my neighbors, loud enough for me to overhear if I was in my yard, about how some people clearly didn't understand that community standards extended beyond the front lawn. There were whispers, then a new rumor, that Brenda was trying to get the board to approve inspections, actual interior inspections of homes, to ensure decorative harmony and prevent unsightly internal disrepair that could affect collective property values. Most people laughed it off, as Brenda being Brenda, another one of her power-mad fantasies. I should have paid more attention. I was planning a short trip, just a week to visit my sister. I'd asked Mr. Henderson to keep an eye on the place, grab my mail. I double-checked all the locks, set the alarm. Standard procedure. When I came back, pulling into my driveway, feeling relaxed and refreshed, I noticed the first odd thing. A small scratch near the deadbolt on my front door, almost like a screwdriver slip. I shrugged it off. Probably just me being clumsy with my keys in the past. I put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned. Tried again. Nothing. It went in but it wouldn't engage. Annoyance started to bubble. Had the lock seized up while I was gone? I tried the knob lock. Same thing. My key. My house key, that I'd used just a week prior, no longer worked on my own front door. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. This wasn't a seized lock. This felt different. I walked around to the back door. Same story. My keys were useless. My heart was hammering now. Had I been robbed? But everything looked undisturbed from the outside. Windows were closed. No signs of forced entry beyond that tiny scratch. My mind raced. What the hell was going on? I called Mr. Henderson. He hurried over. Concern etched on his face. Everything all right? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. I explained the key situation. He tried his spare, the one I'd given him for emergencies. It didn't work either. That's mighty peculiar, he muttered, scratching his head. Mighty peculiar. I ain't seen a soul near your front door except for. He trailed off, looking suddenly uncomfortable. Except for who, Mr. Henderson? I pressed, that cold knot tightening. He shuffled his feet. Well, Brenda was around, and there was a locksmith van here. Day before yesterday. I just figured you'd arranged for some work. Maybe lost your keys on your trip and called ahead. A locksmith? Brenda. The pieces clicked into place. With a horrifying, infuriating clarity. My HOA president, the tin pot dictator of Willow Creek Estates, had changed the locks on my house while I was away. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it was breathtaking. The violation. The absolute arrogance. My initial shock was rapidly being consumed by a towering glacial rage. She hadn't just crossed the line. She'd nuked it from orbit. And she had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she was dealing with a man who planted the wrong begonias. She was about to find out. She was dealing with a man who understood structural engineering, load-bearing capacities, and the beautiful immutable physics of very, very thick steel. This wasn't just about begonias anymore. This was war. And I was going to build a fortress. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not just a nosy neighbor. This was a criminal act. She had changed my locks. The very locks I trusted to keep my world secure and private. The locks that let me sleep at night knowing I was safe in my own space. What had she done inside? Had she rifled through my belongings, poked into my private documents, passed judgment on my furniture, on my life? The thought made my skin crawl. The fury that followed was so pure, so sharp, it felt like ice in my veins. My first priority was simple: get back into my house. I called a 24-hour locksmith, not the same company, of course. Someone new, someone I could trust. He arrived in under an hour, a stocky professional man named S, wearing work boots and sleep in his eyes. I explained the situation, keeping my voice measured, though inside I was a storm waiting to detonate. I showed him my ID, utility bills, the deed. I always keep backups in my glove box and in the cloud. He inspected the lock, whistled low. "These are new," he said. "Standard install, probably done 2 days ago." "You didn't authorize this." "Absolutely not," I replied, tight. "My HOA president did this while I was away." Paused. "That's breaking and entering. If they destroyed the old lock to replace it, that's property damage too." He shook his head. "Heard some HOA horror stories, but this takes the cake." He got to work and I paced the perimeter. Every scratch, every mark now looked different. That tiny scuff near the deadbolt wasn't innocent anymore. It was a trace left by someone who had no right. When S finally cracked the door open, I hesitated. I was afraid. Not of burglars, but of the quiet, calculated violation of privacy. What would I find? What had she moved? What had she touched? I stepped inside. The air was still. Unbothered. No overturned chairs, no visible signs of entry. Mr. Henderson's pile of collected mail sat on the counter. Right where he'd said he'd leave it. That was before she came back with a locksmith. Room by room I moved, slowly scanning. No ransacked drawers, no papers out of place. But there it was. The scent. Faint floral. Sickly sweet. It clung to the air like a fingerprint. Brenda. She'd been here. In my home. Judging, prowling. Deciding what was acceptable and what wasn't. On the hallway table a fresh envelope waited. The HOA seal stamped on the front like a smug grin. I opened it slowly. Inside. A letter on official HOA letterhead, signed. Brenda McTavish. President. It was a triumph of arrogance. A tone-deaf symphony of bureaucratic nonsense. According to the letter, and I quote, "Pursuant to recently ratified neighborhood harmony protocols." They had conducted a wellness and standards check. A wellness and standards check. On a private residence. She claimed they were unable to reach me. No calls. No emails. No notice. Not a single message from the HOA before the locks were changed. They had hired a locksmith. Entered my home. Without my consent. To inspect for internal aesthetic violations. The list of offenses. Suboptimal color coordination in the guest bathroom. Window treatments lacking visual appeal. And the best. A general absence of decorative alone. Decorative alone. She had actually typed that. Attached was a bill. For the locksmith she hired. Fines for each of my aesthetic failings. I crumpled the letter in my fist. This wasn't overreach. This was trespass. This was criminal. My next call was to Carol. My lawyer. Sharp. Uncompromising. The same woman who handled my home purchase. I read her the letter word for word. There was a silence. Then a low whistle. She put it in writing. Carol said. Unbelievable. She actually admitted to changing your locks. Entering your home. To critique your curtains. And your bathroom color scheme. I almost laughed. Almost. Carol didn't. We're sending a cease and desist immediately. Document everything. Photos. Statements. Locksmith invoices. Save every detail. We're going after her. Civil and possibly criminal. Her voice was calm. But there was fire in it. Legal fire. This is illegal entry. This is trespass. Harassment. Possibly conversion if they removed property. It's a buffet of violations. And HOA bylaws. Even the strictest. Do not grant them the right to break into a home for aesthetic purposes. If your house was on fire, maybe. But decorative alone. That's not going to fly. Carol's clarity was a wave of validation. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining things. This was real. And Brenda was about to face consequences. The next few days were a blur of documentation. I signed an affidavit. I photographed the scratches. The envelope. Brenda's letter. Even a half-empty bottle of fancy branded water the locksmith had left behind. I researched my state's HOA laws. Poured through every clause and precedent I could find. Nothing. No trace of these neighborhood harmony protocols she had cited. No approval. No vote. No record. They were fiction. Her fantasy made real with locks and lies. And then I brought in another locksmith. A specialist. This one was military grade. High security. Medical locks. Untouchable without a key and the right tools. The keys were heavy. Solid. Final. They felt like justice. But it still wasn't enough. Not for what she did. Not for what came next if she thought she could get away with it. Her letter made it clear. She believed she could do anything. She believed she owned a piece of my life. A piece of my home. That sense of violation clung to me. Every time I walked through my own front door, I wondered where her eyes had lingered. What conclusions she had drawn. What judgments she had passed. My sanctuary was no longer just mine. The thought that she or anyone from the HOA might one day waltz in again without warning lit a fire in me. I needed a line. A declaration. Something definitive that screamed. This far and no further. Something Brenda McTavish, with her oversized SUV and undersized respect for private property, would understand on a visceral level. I was originally researching high-security doors, thinking maybe a reinforced steel upgrade. But then the idea struck me. Outrageous. Ridiculous. Perfect. A bank vault door. Not a look-alike. The real one. Steel. Heavy. Immovable. The kind of door that made locksmiths sweat and crowbars laughable. The kind of door that would make Brenda's HOA-obsessed eyes twitch. She wanted access. She wanted oversight. Fine. I would give her a standard of security so aggressive it would haunt her. The sheer impracticality of it was part of the appeal. It wasn't just a barrier. It was a statement. A symbol of how far I would go to protect what was mine. And the best part, after combing through the HOA bylaws again, I found nothing. Not one clause that said what kind of door you could or couldn't have. As long as it was maintained and aesthetically congruous. A term I was now ready to debate with the tenacity of a Supreme Court lawyer. What's more congruous than a well-maintained front door? A steel door is always in good repair. And aesthetics. Well, Brenda, that's subjective, isn't it? The decision to install a vault door wasn't something I took lightly. Okay, maybe I did. Fueled by righteous fury and a taste for theatrical defiance. But I'm an engineer. And engineers don't do half measures. I had to be sure it was structurally sound. Feasible. Actually possible to execute. My home was a modern build. Solid concrete foundation. Steel reinforcement in key places. But this wasn't a weekend project. It would require real work. I spent weeks researching. Deep diving into specialist firms that installed commercial safes. Vaults. Panic rooms. Most of them were confused when I explained the job. It's for your front door? One rep asked, is this a high-crime area? Only if you count an overzealous HOA president as a criminal syndicate, I muttered. Eventually I found them. Fortress Max Security Solutions. Based a few states over. They didn't flinch. Their rep Marcus, a grizzled ex-military type, listened to my pitch, then just said, sure. You got the load-bearing structure for the frame. His calm was exactly what I needed. We talked specs. I didn't need it to survive a bomb. But it needed to be unmistakably a vault door. We settled on a custom build. Slightly scaled down from their commercial line. Still massive. 8 inches thick. Solid steel composite. Multiple 1.5-inch locking bolts. A classic circular crank. A high-security Sargent Greenleaf combo lock. Plus a secondary Medeco lock for day-to-day use. It would weigh nearly 2 tons. The frame, custom fabricated, would add more weight and require reinforcement. That led to phase 2, structural assessment. I hired Dr. Anna Sharma, a quiet and methodical structural engineer. She studied the blueprints, tapped on walls, took precise measurements, ran calculations I couldn't follow. At first she looked skeptical, but then, as she uncovered just how overbuilt the house already was, her skepticism shifted to professional curiosity. Your lintel above the entry will need reinforcement, likely a custom steel I-beam. and we'll need new concrete footings beneath the jams. But it's doable, she said. Music to my ears. While I planned my fortress, Brenda made her next move. Carol's cease and desist letter had landed hard. It demanded reimbursement for the locksmith, the rekeyed Medico locks, and hinted clearly at legal action for trespass and emotional distress. Brenda went quiet. Too quiet. Then, the anonymous complaint started. My lawn was uneven. Wasn't. There was a stain on my driveway. It was rainwater. My recycling bin was 6 inches off from regulation placement. Each petty complaint, followed by an official notice, penned with Brenda's signature mix of venom and forced civility. We are merely trying to uphold the standards that make Willow Creek Estates a desirable community. One letter said. It is disheartening when certain residents exhibit disregard for communal harmony. The hypocrisy was laughable. She was trying to bury me under bureaucracy, drown me in nitpicks, trying to force me out. She even tried to rally the neighbors. Mr. Henderson, loyal as ever, told her to go fly a kite. Mrs. Rodriguez, who once seemed timid, stood her ground. She told Brenda that my lack of decorative alone was far preferable to Brenda's lack of human decency. It wasn't just resistance, it was a shift. People were starting to see her for what she was. Then came her boldest move yet. The emergency landscape review. She showed up on my doorstep, flanked by 2 board members. One was Gerald, a nervous accountant. The other, a woman whose main qualification was nodding in agreement at everything Brenda said. They weren't prepared for what they were about to see. Saturday morning I was in the garage organizing tools when I heard the peremptory knock. I opened the side door to find Brenda standing there, clipboard in hand, flanked by her usual acolytes. Mr. Peterson, she said brightly, the tone forced like a children's show host about to reveal something hideous. We're conducting an emergency review of landscaping compliance. There have been concerns. Concerns? I asked, leaning against the doorframe without inviting them in. About what exactly, Brenda? My begonias again? Or have the chickies launched a new offensive? Gerald winced. Brenda's smile thinned. This is no joking matter, Mr. Peterson. It has come to our attention that your property may be harboring invasive plant species, potentially in violation of Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 7 of the revised landscaping bylaws. She actually cited the paragraph. I was almost impressed. Invasive species? I looked over my carefully maintained, entirely native front yard. I'd learned my begonia lesson. Aesthetically at least. She glanced at her clipboard with great ceremony. We've received reports of unregulated dandelion growth near the rear perimeter. I stared at her. Dandelions? That's your emergency? In my backyard? Which was fenced and invisible from the street. You want to inspect my backyard? For dandelions. Brenda. She squared up. It is the HOA's right and duty to ensure all properties are compliant. We require access to the rear of the property. No, I said. Her face hardened. No? What do you mean no? This is an official HOA inspection. And this is private property, I replied, voice even. You are not entering my backyard without a warrant or a court order. Especially not after your last little break-in. Your concern over rogue dandelions does not override my rights. Put it in writing, I added. As per the grievance procedure you love so much. I'll respond in kind. Gerald looked like he wished the ground would open. The other board member was busy pretending to inspect a thread on her blouse. Brenda swelled with indignation. This is an outrage. You are obstructing an official investigation. I will have you know this will be noted in your file. Fines will be levied. Wave away, Brenda, I said, smiling. My lawyer, Carol, is building quite the archive of your correspondence. She finds it illuminating. That landed. Brenda's mouth tightened. Her eyes narrowed. She scribbled something dramatic on her clipboard, spun on her heel, and marched back to her tank-like SUV. Gerald and the other board members shuffled after her. The encounter only reinforced my decision. The vault door wasn't just about stopping them. It was about sending a message. A message in steel. The logistics were brutal. Fortress Max Security Solutions gave me a quote that could make a CEO flinch. Custom fabrication. Crating. Heavy lift transport. A four-man team that would need lodging for a 3-day install. Dr. Sharma coordinated the structural reinforcements, new concrete footings under the threshold and a steel I-beam embedded into the lintel above. We did it quietly. A contractor friend framed it as essential foundation repair due to settling. We timed the loud work for Brenda's Tuesday morning golf games. It felt like a black ops mission. Secret planning. Money flowing out. Nerves stretched thin. The door itself took 8 weeks to build. 8 weeks of Brenda's petty vendettas. And my growing anticipation. The call came at last. Fortress Max was shipping. Project Sanctuary was a go. The vault door arrived like an artifact of war. A flatbed truck. Heavy-duty crating. Tarps stretched across what looked more like military surplus than residential hardware. Marcus and his crew, professional, stone-faced, and built like bunkers, coordinated with a crane company. They hoisted my new front door over the rooftop like a sacred relic. A crowd gathered. Mr. Henderson stood slack-jawed. Mrs. Rodriguez filmed with a grin. Curtains twitched all down the street. Brenda, thankfully, was absent. I had timed it for her executive women's networking luncheon. The installation was a symphony of brute force and precise engineering. The frame had already been set, anchored into footings and the new steel beam. When they uncrated the vault door, it gleamed, a brutalist masterpiece. Nearly a foot thick. The Sergeant Greenleaf lock gleamed like a jeweler's work. The crank handle looked like it belonged on a submarine. The final slide into the frame was smooth. A heavy, echoing thud that settled deep into the house's bones. It was perfect. 3 days. Welding. Calibration. Careful precision. Curious neighbors kept their distance. No one asked too many questions. The door spoke for itself. The cost was ridiculous, but worth every penny. Every time I imagined Brenda's reaction, it felt like money well spent. And Fortress Max had done wonders with the finish. Dark brushed graphite. Formidable but not grotesque. It blended almost with my home's modern lines. Who was I kidding? It looked like a bank had crashed into suburbia. And it was glorious. The first time I spun the wheel and heard the bolts engage with a series of deep, satisfying clunks, I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. This wasn't just security. It was sovereignty. My home was mine. And she was no longer welcome. Carol had advised installing a discreet, high-definition camera with audio. Just in case. I followed through, embedded it right into the door frame. It waited. Watching. It took a week. Tuesday morning. Coffee in hand. Reviewing schematics. My phone pinged. Live feed. Brenda. Lemon yellow pantsuit. Clipboard clenched. Gerald trailing, wilting. She marched up the driveway. Hit the porch. Stopped. Stared. Tilted her head like a confused parrot. Processing. I could see the mental gears jamming. She took a step closer. Peered at the graphite face. The crank. The lock. Gerald, not watching, bumped into her. She reached out. Touched the door. Tapped it with one ringed finger. What in the Sam Hill is that? She whispered. Gerald muttered something faint and helpless. Brenda straightened. Her bluster rebooting. She straightened her lemon-yellow jacket and rapped sharply on the door with her knuckles. The sound was dull, unsatisfying against the thick steel. Mr. Peterson, this is President McTavish. Open this door immediately. We are here for a scheduled follow-up compliance review. I sipped my coffee. I wasn't moving. Let her stew. She knocked again, harder, then seized the massive circular handle and tried to turn it. It didn't budge. Of course it didn't. The door was designed to resist considerably more than Brenda's indignation. Mr. Peterson, she shrieked, her voice climbing in both pitch and volume. This is an official HOA matter. You are required to grant us access. What have you done to your doorway? She was practically screeching now, her face turning an unbecoming shade of puce that clashed spectacularly with her banana-hued suit. Is this some kind of illegal modification? This is not an approved door style. I've never seen anything like it. This is a violation. It was time to make an appearance, but not by opening the door. That was out of the question. Instead, I activated the two-way audio on the security camera. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice calm and slightly amplified. "To what do I owe the pleasure of your unscheduled visit?" Brenda recoiled like the door itself had spoken. Her eyes darted around wildly, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Peterson? Is that you? Where are you? Open this door. What is this monstrosity?" "This," I replied, savoring the moment, "is my new front door. State-of-the-art security. Rather nice, don't you think? And no, I will not be opening it. As I've told you before, you are not welcome on my property or in my home without a legally binding court order." "Court order? Don't be ridiculous," she sputtered. "We are the Homeowners Association. We have bylaws. You can't just install a bunker door on your house. This is completely against aesthetic regulations." "Oh, I don't know, Brenda," I mused. I reread the bylaws very carefully. Section 7, subsection C, regarding exterior doors and entryways. It states doors must be maintained in good repair and present an aesthetically congruous appearance with the neighborhood's established character. This door is in excellent repair. It's brand new and virtually indestructible. As for congruity, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? I find it quite harmonious, very secure, chic. Gerald was now clearly trying to back away, inching toward the steps. Brenda, however, stood firm, perhaps due to principle or perhaps sheer density. "This is an outrage. This is an affront to the entire community. I am the president and I demand you remove this thing and restore a normal door immediately." "Demand all you like, Brenda," I replied cheerfully. "But no. This door stays. And for the record, my lawyer has a copy of the bylaws too. She concurs. There's nothing explicitly forbidding this particular style of high-security door. Perhaps you should have been more specific in your rulemaking." Brenda's face turned crimson. Her fists clenched. You can't do this. I will call the police. I'll have you cited for unauthorized fortification." "Please do call the police," I said, letting the amusement seep into my voice. "I'd be very interested to hear their take on an HOA president demanding entry into a private residence without cause. Especially after your previous illegal entry. I'm sure they'd also be fascinated by my new door. Perhaps they'd like a demonstration of its security features." That gave her pause. The mention of her illegal entry lingered. Her eyes darted to the camera again, perhaps realizing her tantrum was being recorded. Gerald seized the moment. "Brenda, perhaps we should consult the HOA's legal counsel before proceeding," he stammered, tugging at her sleeve. For once, Brenda seemed to deflate. She glared at the door, then back toward the camera. The fight wasn't gone from her eyes, but uncertainty, maybe even fear, had joined it. "This isn't over, Peterson," she hissed, voice low and venomous. "This is a gross violation. You will rue this day." She spun on her heel, nearly tripping, and stomped off toward her ridiculous SUV. Gerald scurried after her like a chastened poodle. I watched them go, a wave of deep satisfaction washing over me. The door hadn't just kept Brenda out. It had shattered her composure. It was more than steel and bolts, it was a boundary she could not cross. The Battle of Beonia Drive, as I privately called it, was won. But the war for Willow Creek Estates had just entered a far more interesting phase. The aftermath was everything I hoped for, and more. Word of Peterson's fortress spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mrs. Rodriguez next door had captured Brenda's meltdown on her phone. With my quiet blessing, she shared it with a few of the more disgruntled residents. Overnight, I went from that guy with the wrong flower bed to a local legend. The man who stood up to Brenda McTavish, and won. The next HOA board meeting was, by all accounts, explosive. Mr. Henderson, who still attended out of civic duty and a taste for drama, gave me a gleeful blow-by-blow. Brenda tried to push an emergency amendment to the bylaws, a ban on bank vault doors, fortified entries, and any door mechanism requiring a crank or combo lock. She painted it as a vital step to preserve the community's traditional aesthetic and prevent architectural anarchy. But for the first time in memory, the board didn't fold. Several members, including the usually timid Gerald, perhaps shaken by Brenda's descent into farce, and maybe moved by Carol's letter naming him complicit in the trespass, pushed back. They questioned the legality of such a retroactive and absurdly specific rule. They pointed out that my door, while unconventional, violated nothing in the current bylaws. Carol, my lawyer, had already sent a courteous letter to each board member. It referenced property rights, state law, and the personal liability they could face if they enforced illegal or improperly ratified HOA covenants. The combination of legal pressure and growing neighborhood unrest proved potent. Brenda's motion died without even a second. She reportedly turned purple with rage, accusing the board of cowardice and betrayal. The Brenda Bling Empire, as neighbors were now calling it, was cracking. With no legal grounds left to challenge the door, Brenda turned to fines. I received increasingly absurd notices, violations for unnatural metallic sheen, failure to provide adequate visitor welcome due to intimidating portal structure, and my personal favorite, creating a neighborhood disturbance by means of overtly defensive architecture. Carol dutifully forwarded each fine to the HOA's legal counsel, now visibly cracking under pressure. Every ridiculous citation only increased our harassment claim. Their attorney, a weary man named Thompson who likely regretted ever accepting their account, began advising caution. Legal fees were mounting. So were potential damages. And the HOA's directors and officers' insurance? At risk of cancellation altogether. Meanwhile, my vault door became a minor tourist attraction. Cars slowed. Delivery drivers called me Fort Knox. Henderson brought cookies and asked for updates from the command center. The neighborhood changed. The fear that once silenced dissent began to lift. Residents questioned fines, demanded spending transparency, and whispered of a recall election. The door had become more than a door. It was defiance in stainless steel. Brenda, stripped of her ability to harass me directly, began to unravel. She paced her lawn, muttering. Her rules grew erratic, desperate. And the pushback only intensified. The end came a few months later. Our legal case was ironclad. Between the illegal lock change, the harassment, and her own written admissions, the HOA's defense crumbled. They settled. The settlement covered all my legal fees, the emergency locksmith work, the med ecosystem, the cost of the vault door, and a generous sum for emotional distress and invasion of privacy. But the true prize? A written apology from Brenda McTavish, circulated to all residents. It was clearly drafted by her lawyer, dry, deflective, grudging. But it met the terms. And it was real. So was her resignation. Under mounting pressure, facing multiple recall petitions, Brenda stepped down as president. Then from the board entirely. She sold her house not long after. Rumor has it she moved to a community with no HOA at all. The irony. A special election was held. A new board took over, reasonable people. Mrs. Rodriguez. Even a reformed Gerald, eager to make amends. The bloated 300-page rulebook was trimmed. Brenda's petty edicts were struck down. New clauses were added, protecting homeowner rights and clearly limiting HOA authority over private property. And the door? It stayed. They didn't dare touch it. It had become legend. And besides, as I'd always maintained, it technically violated no clear rule. It stands today as a testament to one woman's outrageous overreach, and one man's slightly over-engineered but completely effective rebuttal. Sometimes, to protect your peace, you have to get a little fortressy. I learned a lot through this, about standing your ground, knowing your rights, and the quiet power of preparation. A good lawyer helps. So does several tons of reinforced steel. So if you're ever dealing with a tyrannical HOA, remember my story. You don't have to go full bank vault. But never underestimate the power of calm defiance, sharp research, and just a little bit of theatrical engineering. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. And if you've got an HOA horror story, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Who knows, maybe it'll inspire my next home improvement project. Hopefully it won't need to be quite so extreme.